Hello, my name is Kit Kowalski, and I'm joined here by my co-host Edie Wyatt. We're here to talk about sex, gender, and all the nonsense in Australia today. Welcome to the Dollhouse.
Hello, how are you today?
Well, I'm doing fine. I mean, it's we've got some cool weather. The humidity seems to have subsided. We've got patchy rain on and off. It's quite pleasant actually in Sydney.
Easy for you to say,
It's
easy for you
lovely
to
here.
say.
And what's the weather like where you are?
Well, I've got all my outdoor furniture in my lounge room. Uh, Everything is locked up. And we're getting ready for Cyclone. What's his name?
Alfred.
Alfred. He was
Yeah.
going to be called Anthony, apparently. Anthony was the next one
Oh.
on the list, but because the election's so close, um, they decided that Cyclone Anthony wasn't going to be
Oh,
the
that's
one. So
funny.
we've got tropical cyclone Alfred, which is, and he's a bit tardy. He was supposed to be here today, but like a lot of men, he's decided to take his time, and he's not going to come apparently until Friday, tomorrow afternoon. It was tomorrow morning, and now it's tomorrow afternoon. He's just hanging out on the coast, waiting about. He's Category 2 cyclone. They don't know whether he's going to upgrade. They hope he's not while he sits out there. And apparently, I was just watching that he'll be Category 2 on land over us for about 12 hours before he move. Like we'll be in this eye of this thing. I don't know what I'm going to do with my dog. How's my dog going to go to the toilet? This is what I'm thinking.
Mm.
How do you take your dog out to the toilet
I've got
in a
zero
Category 2
advice. Zero
cyclone?
advice.
I don't
But
know either.
I would like you to caution you against unnecessary misgendering of the cyclone. As
Ah,
I mean, I just want to check with you. Did you actually ask the cyclone's gender identity
I
before you
didn't.
assumed that
No.
Alfred was a man?
I'm
So,
not very happy with
I
him, so I'm
mean,
happy to call him.
who's the real criminal here?
Yeah, that's right.
Edie.
Yeah, I'm happy to be sexist and call him an absolute bastard who's going to come and destroy everything.
Yeah,
So
well,
yeah, I'm happy to keep his gender identity as male. Um, yeah, well, they used to be all female, didn't they? And then they
I think,
changed it. Now they go from one to the other. I think they take
yeah,
turns.
I thought that they had like a system where like tropical storms were one thing and hurricanes were another thing. And
I think they're the
I
same,
are
but
they?
we call
Okay,
them
yeah,
different things in different countries.
right. And then they've had, yeah, so I had thought that at one point there was hurricanes are one gender and
Cyclones are another.
cyclones are another gender,
I
but
think
I'm
they're
not all
like
that
toilets
confident.
where they go the other
What's
way.
what's the difference between the genders? I don't know what the difference is between a cyclone and a hurricane.
I don't
Um,
know.
it
We're
doesn't
all
really matter if you're sheltering from one. Um,
no, apparently it's going to be a serious because it's a usually in Queensland, for those in the know, they come further north. Tropical cyclones don't normally hit Brisbane head on.
hmm.
It's such a high population, not just Brisbane, Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast. So we're a really high population area in the southeast. They normally hit up north and then they travel down, and by the time they hit us, they're a tropical low, um, which we find inconvenient, but it's not quite as dangerous. So yeah, we're going to have to face the reality of whatever's going to hit us. No, there's nothing you can do about it. The thing about
Yeah.
natural disasters is you can't. And I was a friend of mine in a restaurant. We're out there working out what should go in, what we can't bring in. Some of they've got beautiful lamps outside that probably get smashed, but you can't get an electrician to get them out, because they're attached. Whole bunch of issues. And last time, like they in a flood zone, and so occasionally they face these issues. But when they had COVID, they are in the same district as ABC. So it's our Ultimo. It's South Bank there, and it's very, very woke. Um, and when they had COVID, they came to him and said, "What do you think about the government response to COVID?" And he said he's um, a Lebanese migrant, and he said, "I'm so thankful that the government. He couldn't believe the
Mm.
government were giving him all this money to keep his company alive until it finished." And he said, if I didn't have this money, there's no way we'd survive. I'm really thankful." He wanted the government to know he was really thankful for this money. And he said, I could tell immediately they didn't want to hear that.
They don't want to
And they
know.
never asked him again about what he thought. The ABC just want their own narrative. They want to be told, they want to be told exactly what they want to be told, particularly by a migrant, like migrants from the Middle East should all
Well,
think the same.
they definitely have not that you could name it to them, but they definitely have their own kind of racial bias going on, don't they?
They do.
Um,
Yeah.
and you're definitely not allowed to surprise the ABC by being of the wrong identity and the wrong politics.
Or not even
You know,
not know what the identity
like
is. Like
be,
they have to think, like if you came to this country, you probably wouldn't even know a lot about the sides and what side certain people were
yeah.
on, what side other people, and that migrants were supposed to be all left wing.
Well, I think and it is often surprising, like when you grow up, as I did in that left-wing bubble, and you find out that migrants are often the least left-wing people.
Yeah.
Because they're very like often like the migrant experience, it is like it's very insular, it's very and it's very individualistic. Like
Mm.
and like migrants, no matter what country you're going to or from, you often end up living in like very small insular enclaves. You go somewhere and you basically your friends and your neighbors are the people who came from your country or from similar
Mm.
countries. And the name of the game is often like hard work and sacrifice to establish your life,
Yeah.
to give your kids a better start.
I always
Um,
find migrants
like,
really interesting as well.
yeah.
I always ask them about what they think, what's happening in their country, what do they think? I always ask everyone about that too, even Americans, and because it's going to be biased, right? If you ask me what's happening in my country, I'll have a perspective. Um, because you don't, they have their own worldview.
Yeah.
They're not going to come here and just adopt one worldview.
And
It's really racist to think that.
and they come for like different people come for different reasons as well.
Hmm.
Um, like particularly what I think they term like the economic migrants, people who they aren't like or economic refugees, I think maybe is the term I'm looking for. People who like they might be like middle class in a country that has had a socialist or a communist revolution, right? And they're like middle class in a third world country. And so they come basically looking for a better life. Like, and they think
Yeah.
that the Australian way of life is actually pretty good. Um, and there's something about Australian culture where you're supposed to like denigrate Australia. You're supposed to think this is the best country on earth, but also it's kind of not very cool to say so.
Yeah. So,
You know,
put shit on it,
yeah.
which
Yeah.
is what Trump's playing into, right, as well. I mean, I swore I wouldn't mention his
Uh,
name,
we
but
just had a conversation about how we weren't going to talk about Trump.
well, the problem is we've been saying, what are we going to talk about? We had something planned, but we've been busy. I've been panicking about this stupid cyclone.
Yeah.
Um, and my daughter's had a birthday. You've had a family birthday. So we haven't done our homework. So we got
Well,
down to this. You've done a good lot of writing. You've done some homework. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff you're writing about. But what my complaint was is Trump is dominating the conversation everywhere.
yeah.
And this is what he does. This is what he did last time. He would say a tweet and the whole news world will fall apart. And he loves it. He loves
Oh,
it.
look, I think
It's his favorite thing in the world is to be the center of everyone's attention.
There's something like I often wonder where does Trump fall on, that scale of like chaotic good, chaotic neutral, chaotic evil. Like he's definitely on the chaotic axis somewhere. Is it like he's not lawful good, he's not unlawful uh good. He's definitely chaotic somewhere.
Yeah,
And um he's so good at diverting attention.
yeah,
And it's something I do really kind of worries me actually is the Turks, we're all very happy at the moment that Trump's out there prosecuting the case against like men and women's sports. What what is the next thing? Like what's the other thing that we're being diverted from? Like what's
yeah.
the thing that we're not paying attention to? Because but at the same time, I don't know if it's in our power to know just because of how
No.
chaotic it is.
I think we need to be pretty humble, which has been my argument with people. I made some marks about the Ukraine
Oh
from
dear.
a from someone's not. I'm not invested in it. I'd never been to the Ukraine. I've never, you know, I don't know. I'm generally on a side of someone who is an aggressor and someone who is not. I'm on this side of the person who's not. So I'm not on the side of Russia. Certainly not on the side of um, Putin. I'm certainly not on the side of people going into trying to take other people's countries. And I do think we should stand up for small countries. My point was, you know, America is not obliged to protect everyone in the world. And in fact, I thought Trump was pretty clear in saying that he wasn't going to do it anymore. And if he did, he'd expect something in return. And I'm not in favor of them, raping all their mineral reserves. I don't think that's a good
Mm.
idea, but who am I? Like I'm a person in a little city that's about to be hit by a cyclone. I don't know really shit about what's happening. I've got the same set of information. And so you get these people who've got the little flag in their profile and they say they know all the things and they give me no additional information at all to what I'm subject to on the internet. We've all got the same information. We don't really know whether some of it's true, some of it's not. So we just say, look, I don't know whether it's true, but I know this little thing. And that little thing is that you know, maybe Trump is playing a game and maybe his game is exactly the game he declares, which that he's going to make America isolationist. He's going to try and get the debt down in America. And part of that is that he's not going to fund other people's bullshit arguments anymore. Maybe that's it. Maybe he wants to stop the war.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to think that that could be true, isn't it?
It does seem a bit
I feel
unlikely.
so like I feel so conditioned
Yeah.
to say no, he's lying. No, he's
Hmm.
not doing what he says. No, he's a bad man, right?
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
think it's we're
it
addicted to the narrative. Yeah.
it is, yeah. Like we saw earlier this week, like there was a press conference where Vance and Trump hurt Zelensky's feelings.
I did.
Um,
It was a shit show.
and like it's really, I don't, again, like I'm not in the favor of invading small countries. I'm not in favor of Russia, and Putin's dictatorship, like world dictatorship. Um, and nor am I in favor of like the NATO kind of soft aggression by like getting up to Russia's border, you
Yeah.
know. Um, but and ultimately, I it does not matter whose side you are on. And I can't say this more clearly. If you are at war, it is bad. It is bad for your people. It is bad for your economy. People will be shot, killed, bombed. People will be homeless. People will be dispossessed. People will be starved. Your economy will collapse, and it will take generations to get yourself back on an even keel.
Mm.
Like,
It's worse than a
there
cyclone.
there are a small number of billionaires, trillionaires who benefit from a wartime economy,
Yeah.
right? And when you're talking about who is supporting war, who's promoting war, you really have to think about where is that money going to fund that war? And what
Yeah.
is the point of putting that money through the system? Like,
Yeah.
who's giving
As
the money? What are they getting for it? And who are they spending it with? Whose market are they going and buying that ammunition, those tanks, those weapons from? I like
the
being
military
at war
industrial
is
complex, I think.
wrong.
Yeah.
It is wrong.
Yeah.
It's not a feminist position, like, to be pro-war.
No, no. And, there's a whole bunch of complex geopolitical issues involved, and some of them we're not privy to. I think it's okay to admit that you're not privy to all the geopolitical machinations. But some things that are obvious, you say out loud, like I think that the American Democrats have become one of the biggest warmongering parties.
Yeah.
They certainly rival the American Republicans, who have always had a reputation for being
And that's
a little bit
why,
easy with the weapons.
like, I find this conversation so disorienting
Mm,
because, like, when I was growing up and coming of age, it was all, like, the Republicans, like, it was a very standard, uncontroversial thing
yeah.
to say. The Republicans are pro-war. They want the wartime economy. They want to prolong wars. They want to have perpetual war. They're invading the Gulf. They're invading the
Mm,
Gulf again. Oh, look, they're invading the Gulf again.
mm. Oh, there's no
Like,
weapons of mass
oh,
destruction. What a
oh, we
surprise.
better go again. Okay, the war's not
And
over.
taking over
Um,
countries and installing
puppet
alternative
governments,
dictators.
yeah.
They're
Like,
doing that shit all the time, which is what I said on Twitter. Look, this is routine for America.
yeah.
They're economic imperialists, and it's not. Let's just be honest about it, and let's be honest about the fact that we are absolutely dependent on them for military strength. And sooner or later, they're going to come to Australia and knock on our door and say, "Look, you guys need to up your military spending," because Europe and us and a whole bunch of people have been just dependent on them spending more and more. And the problem with empires, and let me tell you this from history, you can just try and disprove me if I'm wrong. The empires usually are sunk by the weight of their own military. They're very expensive to maintain, and ultimately they can't. I mean, you look at the UK, you look at
Yeah.
British Empire. It was ultimately sunk in World War II, at which point, Churchill begged like a little, you know, boy for the US to come into his and save his country.
Well,
There was no question about how humble he was. He absolutely begged them, and would have been dancing a jig when Pearl Harbor was bombed,
yeah.
um, to get America into that war. They were completely reluctant to do it. So I mentioned a couple of these things. Let's talk about it from a historical perspective. And everyone loses their mind and gets hysterical. And I think it's related to this ABC thing. I mean, let's circle
Well,
back. I think it's related
yeah.
to the way that people are addicted to clinging to a narrative, clinging to the narrative of the good people, the ones on the right side, the very sensible middle-aged women who look seriously at you and talk in a deep voice and ask very probing questions, but got nothing going on or in the between the ears, some of these women, which
Well,
we're talking
that's
about
just it.
next
It's
week, I
like,
think, yeah.
yeah, I think next week we're going to do an episode about the pick Mishas of the Australian media elite, which will be fun.
We'll be very
Um,
anti-feminist for a week.
yeah. But yeah, like, we've got the cash crowd, we've got Zelensky, it's the underdog, and let's put the Ukraine flag in our profiles, and it literally does nothing, right?
Hmm.
You know, um, but let's not investigate, like, what's precipitated the war. Why is the war, like, what's actually happening? Let's not probe deeper into it. Let's just stick with the narrative that
Yeah.
Zelensky what does Zelensky as a man stand to gain by prolonging the war, by being a
Mm.
wartime president,
Yeah.
right? Um, can he transition into being a peacetime president?
If we assume that
Um,
Putin isn't literally Hitler, and that's one of the
well,
problems with the
well,
narratives, Hitler does a lot of heavy lifting. He might be literally Hitler. He might go
yeah, I
from
mean,
the from
like if
Ukraine to
anyone,
Australia. He might try and take over other countries.
it might be different if, maybe I personally would feel slightly differently if this was being kind of done by North Korea,
Mm.
because if um, like what you've got to actually understand, like what do they want, right? You've got to get beyond that narrative and look, what do they want? Do they want to participate in the global world order, or do they want to dominate, totalize, and
Mm.
spread their way of life to people who don't want it, right? Like
Yeah.
um, what is actually being prosecuted here,
Putin does have the
and that's
coin for that anyway. He doesn't have the coin, and he doesn't like Hitler have.
yeah.
Like the thing with Hitler is that he didn't have the internet. He had complete domination of his own media. So we don't
Mm.
have that. We have. I watched the Joe Rogan Elon Musk interview this week, and they started out saying, you know what's happening? I don't know what's happening. Do you know? And they had this little joke about they don't know. They've got the same
Like no
information,
one
which I
knows.
think is
Yeah.
unlikely. I think it's unlikely Elon Musk and Joe Rogan have exactly the same set of information that we do. I think they've got other sets of information than we do. But I think the point was valid in that we're all a little bit since the downfall of the trust of the mainstream media, we're all a little bit in the dark because, I mean, we're going to talk about the ABC tonight. Do you trust the ABC, Kit Kowalski, having studied them now for how many years? Have you been out at 4 years or something like that?
I don't even know. I absolutely don't trust the ABC. And like I'm quite, there's a lot of grief for me in that I used to think that the ABC, I mean, obviously I thought it was more left wing, or, more left leaning than some of the news sources out there, like say than the Murdoch press. I thought that I thought it could be coming close to giving us like a balanced picture of world events, right?
Yeah, I did
But
too. I did too,
yeah,
yeah.
I used to think that, and it's always
And
funny
maybe
when
they
I hear the
were. Can we
Americans.
say maybe they were?
I think so. I think maybe they were.
When I was growing up in the 70s and the 80s, they were different.
Well,
They're very much more serious bunch of, mostly dominated by men, of course.
it's always interesting to see like the Americans, like when when Kim Williams, the chairman of the board of the ABC, criticized Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan hit back with, "Well, who are you?" Frankly, but also
That's
like,
hilarious.
and then I think Elon Musk came back with, "That's like state-sponsored media, right? That's
Yeah.
that's Pravda. That's,"
Yeah.
and so Americans think that it's crazy that we have state-sponsored media,
Yeah.
but for us, like the beauty of it is that it's supposed to not bow to advertisers.
Well,
So,
there's a charter in the
like,
Constitution, isn't there?
yeah,
I
it's
mean,
meant to serve the
uh,
people, right?
yeah, it's supposed to be like the police. Yeah, I remember calling them when I first came aware of this. ABC wrote a story about um, churches. One of their hacks was on it about, and I looked at it and thought, oh, that's not true. That the biggest abusers, domestic abusers, were in churches. And I thought, well, I've been in the church a long time, and I can assure you that the Housing Commission, suburb I grew up in, saw more abusers there than I'd have in the church. Not that they're not in the church, of course, they're everywhere. But I questioned their narrative. All of a sudden, I saw their narrative. I thought, hang on, that's not right. And I did a bit of research and I figured out that they're all. And I said, look, these guys are just state sponsored media. And I remember saying that on Facebook many years ago before I got to the gender thing. And everyone lost their minds. How dare you say such a thing? And I was on the left at the time, and I remember that feeling that most of us remember of being piled on for saying the thing that shouldn't be said.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. You can't say that it's funded by the government and that influences the narratives because the implications of that are devastating. That the entire government has been captured by an ideology. Which makes you sound like a conspiracy theorist.
Well, it
Uh,
is.
well, when you read, but when you keep reading it and seeing it and realizing it's actually the case, well, how frightening do you think that is? Well, you might think that it's frightening that I say it, but I know it's the truth. So how frightening do you think it is to be me?
Well, yeah, so we have a little bit of an example that we wanted to talk about today, from the lovely ABC Queer. And I
You
say
block me,
lovely. Uh,
ruthlessly block me, and I
it's
have
so
had to
funny.
sign into a different
I'm
account to see
sorry.
it.
It's so funny. So ABC Queer is an Instagram channel which is run by the ABC, by a small unit in the ABC called the Queer Media Unit, headed up by our queer content lead, Monique Shafter, who's a non-binary lady. Um,
How dare you say that she's a non-binary lady?
she is a lady.
That's a microaggression. Macroaggression. Probably
It's a
it's
macro,
literally
macro, yeah.
violence.
I'm sorry if that physically hurts you,
Mm.
Mon. Um, so AB, ABC Queer was started in like 2000, I think 2000, because it won, and it was basically set up to literally win Australian Workplace Equality Index points,
Mm.
right? So the ABC really wanted to do really, really, really well in the Australian Workplace Equality Index. And so they were like, right, well, what's something we can do? And something that we can do turns out to be create a literal like propaganda channel on Instagram that just covers queer issues from a queer perspective, prepackaged and digested by the Ultimo media elite for the people who identify, who wish that they were the Ultimo media elite. And so I read this like most days, and sometimes I feel a little bit bad like criticizing it because, it's Instagram, it's meant to be sort of short news snippets, and it's meant to just be little news grabs. But because it's Instagram, it's news attainment, right? It's infotainment, and they don't, to use one of their words, explore the nuance of some of these stories adequately. And a lot of the
By
content,
by nuance, do you mean facts?
I mean, the facts, yeah. Like it's like they're brightly colored, they're celebratory, everything that a queer person does. And, queer, what is that even? Anything an LGBTIQA plus person can possibly do is celebrated and lionized and lauded. They're very pro Biden Harris in the election. They're pretty anti-Liberal Party. I don't even know if they go as far as being pro ALP in Australia, but they're definitely
Well, they're too left for the
anti-Liberal Party.
Labor Party even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, like it's so biased. And but what caught my eye yesterday was there's been a recent event where a fellow who lived in South Africa. I'm just going to get his name. So it's this guy, it was Imam Muhsin from, I believe, from South Africa. There was another news site that actually showed the footage. So he's in his car. Someone gets out of the car and with a gun, points the pistol at inside the car and shoots. apparently he's the world's first openly gay Muslim leader, uh, killed last month.
And was he
And
murdered, Kit Kowalski, by a right-wing extremist? Do you know?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I literally don't know. And this is not reported by the ABC.
no. We
Right.
would
So,
assume, yeah, look, if I had money to bet on it, I'm not a betting person, but I bet that it was probably a Muslim person who killed him. Look, let's not
well,
speculate, but if I was to speculate,
so we can speculate all we like.
hmm,
But the fact is that, the person who stops his car and gets out and like shoots him
hmm.
is all dressed in black, has a hoodie. That's it. That's
Oh,
all we
so they've
know.
never been caught. They've not been caught.
So I don't I don't think he has been caught, and I don't
Yeah.
think it's been claimed by anyone. We don't know, is this a hate crime? We don't know if he owed money at the bookies. We don't know
Hmm.
anything. But that's never let the lack of facts get in the way of a good privileged narrative.
Hmm.
So, like the ABC queer coverage says the world's first openly gay Muslim leader was killed last month. And the real crime here, to date, no major Islamic organization has made a statement on the heinous crime. So they don't say his name in the first page of the post, right? But they identified that the real tragedy is not that this man has been murdered, like in broad daylight. The tragedy is that no Islamic organization has said anything about it.
I wonder why. I wonder why no one would say anything about it. And, according to Wikipedia, there's been the police are investigating two gunmen killed him after he was involved with a lesbian wedding. Um, you know, uh, we wait for this is how the narrative works. We
Yeah.
wait for the person who is responsible to be found out who it was. Now, this happens with mass shootings and everything, and then we can spin our own narrative on it. Then we can say if it was a right-wing extremist, we can say it was Islamophobia, which is what they're desperate. ABC are desperate to call it
They
Islamophobia.
they're desperate to get onto Islamophobia.
Yeah, most of
And
us probably think because of statistics and the reality of um, the Muslim world, that it would be very dangerous. It would be a very dangerous choice to be a openly gay imam. In a way, it's not as dangerous to be an openly gay Christian leader.
well, I did look this up, and there are varying attitudes to homosexuality, like in Islamic cultures and countries, right?
Mm,
And they range from um, you can be gay, you just can't act gay.
mm,
Like you can have those thoughts, you just can't act on them. Um, to well, we all know that there are some countries where gays are thrown off buildings
yes.
or hung or executed, public executions of homosexuals.
Almost
Um,
all Islamic leaders will say it's prohibited, that
yeah,
homosexuality is prohibited in Islam. I mean, that's well known. People have said it out loud on television. I've been in the Muslim world, been connected to a Muslim community for 30 years. I can tell you that it's a known fact that homosexuality is not really allowed in Islam, and nor is it in Christianity, fundamental
yeah.
Christianity. It's an honest truth. I'll say it out loud. It's not considered. Certainly, we have gay people in our church, but you would never have an openly gay Baptist pastor um, because of the biblical prohibition on homosexuality. That's the reality. of. And
Mm.
there's some places in Christianity that kind of reframe that and say, well, let's put it in historical context, let's be this, let's be that. And so they do have some churches you'll see with the rainbow flag, um, who do allow it. And obviously, there's not many of those that get blown up. Um, Generally, within the Christian community, we might, I mean, I would look down my nose at some of them because they accept gender woo as well. So it's not that, it's certainly not the gay thing, it's that they reframe the scriptures in a way where they just allow anything that they say.
Mm.
And they do it with postmodernism, and they do it with German um, theology, German sort of philosophy. So that's my criticism, and I would say that criticism, but I'm not going to go and blow them up. While in the Islamic world, things are a little bit different. That if you went out to Western Sydney and you started a gay mosque, what do you reckon would happen to that? Do you think they would be met with some hostility?
I would suggest it's possible, yes.
By right-wing extremists or by,
Yeah.
most probably by the Islamic community would find it
And look,
offensive.
and this is, I mean, this is one of the things is that, um, I think I'm probably touching on issues here that I'm not too qualified to be speak with in authority. Um, but there is a difference between like the culture and, for want of a better word, like what the actual religious doctrine is, right? And so the religious doctrine can say one thing, but then the culture can become more tolerant over time,
Yes, which is
right?
what's happened
And
with Christianity to women,
yeah,
for instance.
and
Yeah,
we don't like, and we totally, and we do see that there are Muslim countries that are like more accepting, right?
and have been. I think Muslim society, it was particularly before the Islamic Revolution in Iran, a lot of Muslims were very moderate. My husband's parents were very moderate, for instance, very moderate Muslims. I don't think I see families where there's a gay person, Muslim families, and they're not not going to kill them. You know,
Well,
the suggestion is ridiculous. They just they accept it. They may not agree. They may not. There may be a little bit of all tension and oh, what are we going to do about that? A little bit of chat. But generally, Muslim people love their family in the same way that other people love their family.
yeah,
And if left on their own, and this is what I believe, without this extremism, which is a political form of extremism and a political form of religious extremism, they would just get on with it. And most Muslims, when I say that there'd be tension in the Western suburbs, that wouldn't have been the case 50 years ago. Um, this is not, I don't think it's a problem of Muslims necessarily, though a lot of people would disagree with me. I think it's a particular form of militant political Islam, which the ABC completely ignores, which is a problem right throughout the world. And I say that as a Christian because they kill us as quickly as anything else. And when I say they kill us, I mean Islamic extremists. And it absolutely is a problem in Western Sydney. I mean, we already know
mm.
that.
Well, like the reason I wanted to talk about this particular like thing that's happened and the way that the ABC Queer have covered it is because of the way they frame it in the oppression narrative. So I don't want
Yes.
to get too much into the weeds of like what I think about Islam and Muslims. And, I think that there's a huge variety of people. There are bad people everywhere. There are good people everywhere. And I
Yeah.
don't want to make too much comment. Um, but like, this article, it's one of those ones that has like 5 or 6 slide pages that you click through. And on the first page, it talks about how the first openly gay imam was killed, right? And I think
Yeah. And
he must
the
obviously
quote
know
we
he's taking a risk, right?
the quote we have is the lack of response to the murder of Imam Muhsin sends a chilling message that queer and trans Muslims do not matter that our suffering is not worthy of recognition, that our deaths will not be mourned. There's that oppression narrative.
Exactly. So, like their response to it is so inhuman. You know,
Mm,
there's someone has been murdered in broad daylight,
mm,
and they identify that the crime is the silencing of queer and trans Muslims, right?
yeah, and queer and trans people more generally.
And then on like you click through 2 pages, and they quote this researcher in LGBTQIA plus rights and Islam, Aisa Zahrain.
Mhm.
Um, and the quote there is, as a gay Muslim married to a man, Imam Muhsin was not just a victim of Islamophobia. He was a victim of the compounded hatred that Muslim LGBTIQA plus individuals face. So, so on the one hand, like we know that there's a tension in Islam with homosexuality, right? But that's obviously, according to this researcher, this obviously has not what has caused this crime to occur. What's caused the crime to occur is Islamophobia somehow, and also an external hatred of like LGBTQIA Muslim individuals,
So
right?
it's a combination of Islamophobia and queer phobia
Yeah,
is
that's
what
right.
is what this man suffered from.
Exactly.
We can't suggest that maybe there was a Islamic extremism was involved, and maybe they'll never find out. Maybe it's South Africa, right?
Yeah.
So the whole government's useless, so the police are useless, so they may never find out. It may never get investigated. I know that I don't think that's a controversial statement. I know South Africans, the country's in the toilet basically in terms of the administration. So they may never find out. ABC know that. Maybe they know they'll never find out. So they can make their own story up. They can use this man's brutal murder in the street as a way to enforce their own narrative that the real problem is you dumb bastards
That
who
you're not accepting, that
you're not
you don't
accepting
accept the
enough.
queer Muslims.
You haven't really adopted our narrative like you should have. You know, the problem in the progressive narrative, the problem is always in the heart of the regular Joe. And they position themselves as the intellectual elite who tell everybody else how we're going to fix all the evil in the world by fighting Islamophobia, by fighting all the imaginary things. Transphobia, Islamophobia, both imaginary, um, and all the the colonial oppression that we're suffering.
Well, I mean, just the thing is, like I 100% think that we should fight racism and homophobia. I'll
Hmm.
put up my hand there. I think that those two things are wrong.
Yeah.
Um, but I put a pause on Islamophobia because um, this idea that there is a phobia, right, that is in the same class as racism, sexism, homophobia, all the other things that I think are wrong,
Hmm.
um, it it urges me to do something, right? It urges me to accept Islam and to
Yes.
accept. Now, I may accept Islam. I may think that it's a great thing, but I haven't had the opportunity to do any investigation into Islam to critically examine, is this something that I should actually be phobic about?
Hmm.
Is this something that maybe I don't want to accept? Like, you know,
Hmm.
you could say, oh, let's fight billionaire phobia, right? We've got to stop this persecution of the billionaires.
Hmm.
Or I don't know, let's let's fight bigotophobia. Let's stop the persecution of the bigots, right? Let's pick any other group in society and make a phobia about them. And
Yeah.
suddenly you're forced teamed with them, whether or not they're good. There's
And
no
and
critical
whether or not
investigation.
there's a reason to be a little bit phobic. I mean, my husband's from a Muslim family. He's a Christian convert. When we went to Lebanon we didn't necessarily call up the relatives, you know, and that wasn't because we're Islamophobic. It it's there is a genuine concern when they will see you as a convert, although he wouldn't consider
Yeah.
himself a convert, that there will be some hostility. We've seen the hostility, we've felt the hostility. It's a real thing. Whether it then crosses the threshold into violence is it maybe isn't a real fear. But if you wanted to do your research about that sort of thing, there is some basis for it. There is some basis to worry that there is a form of Islamic extremism which crosses over to violence and that will threaten people who are both Muslim and are both non-Muslim and who come against the narrative. Rushdie, for instance, I mean, how
Yeah.
much attention did he get?
I know. Like that's, yeah. I mean, that was
Because,
probably the first time I really heard about Islam and
hmm,
Islamic extremism
yeah, it was
was
way above
Salman
the curve.
Rushdie.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And
And I
then
read
he
his book.
actually
It wasn't
got
like all that, It was
no, then he got stabbed, didn't he? And
yeah,
that was
that's
hard. That
right.
was really hushed up. There was, oh, let's not talk about that terrible thing happening. If he was non-binary and he was stabbed by a right-wing extremist, we would never hear the end of it. And we
Mm,
know that. What is concerning is, and this is related to women's issues as well, is that when women are oppressed by not just Islamic people, but in their own cultures, Indigenous women, for instance, who have shockingly high rates of abuse by Indigenous men. We can't say that. We've always got to be excusing them. We've all got to say it's colonial oppression. The real problem is colonial oppression.
yeah, the real problem is racism, and the real problem is, yeah,
What the
um,
white people are thinking, because the white people are so racist, these men can't help
or
but beat their wives and rape women.
and again, like it's that hierarchy of oppression, but somehow it never sort of works for women in women's favor because, like, on the one hand, you've got the hierarchy of oppression where queer trans women are the most oppressed, and oh, poor them.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, we don't
but
exist.
on the other hand, well, if you're a woman who is in a violent relationship, but you happen to belong to a minority that has an anti-colonial struggle,
Mm,
well, you just have to put up with that until the anti-colonial struggle is resolved,
that's right. Yeah.
and and then we'll get to you and your domestic violence and whatnot, and the shocking poverty that you're experiencing.
And all these
Um,
narratives, you'll find them in Our Watch is when I first saw it, when I first started reading the ABC stories. I would track them back, which you would do as well, because we're both a little bit insane in that way. I would look at them, I'd look at all the links that they put to substantiate their arguments that gender is the root of all oppression for women. And I would read the documents. A lot of them were from Our Watch, a lot of them were from independent, no, government funded lobby groups. And then you look at the references. They're dominated by the UN, by WHO, by international bodies who generate these narratives. And they do it for a purpose. These are government generated narratives. Can we mention again that the ABC is a government funded media organization? These people get paid lots of money. I watch Sky News a little bit, which I've got reason to complain about today as well. They're not perfect, but they do complain about how much more money. I mean, they have to sing for their supper. So they have to put things
yeah,
on YouTube. They have to generate that income. They might get one or two researchers if they want to do a story on something. They might get one or two researchers. Well, ABC Queer would have a whole room of them, I would think. Like Media Watch has got a massive bit of
yeah.
funding and a room of people who are employed just to do this. Now, if
Mm.
you or I got it, we would never get jobs for them anyways. But if by some miracle of nature, someone put us in there, we wouldn't last 2 seconds because we have the wrong slant, right? We can't argue that ABC Queer. You've been watching them for a long time. Um, I'm blocked, obviously, so they don't come up in my feed. Um, but would you say they have a particular slant? Would you'd be able to write this story because you know what the slant is, right?
Well, 100%. So I want to go on to the next thing that they say because there's actually a progression. So that
Yeah.
we start with, oh, he's gay, right?
Mm,
And then we say, well, but it's also Islamophobia and gay and LGBT. So we're not talking about gay
yes.
anymore,
Yeah.
right?
It's the
Um,
trans people as well.
and then the next slide, the quote is, if he was targeted as a gay Muslim, the refusal to acknowledge each aspect of his identity reinforces the harmful myth that one cannot be both authentically Muslim and queer. This is a false dichotomy that alienates countless individuals. It is not one man's murder. It is about an ongoing erasure, a deliberate silencing of LGBTQIA plus Muslims with their own communities. So,
Can we do a poll? I
so
think we've already
again,
done a poll of
like,
Muslims to say, can you be Muslim and gay? What do you
well,
think the answer would be?
the the thing is that okay, so we're talking now, we're bringing in intersectionality, right? We're saying you've got to respect all of the different separate lenses of a person's personality,
Hmm.
right? And they each have their own right struggle attached to them. And then again, the real crime isn't the murder, the actual murder that occurred. The
Hmm.
real crime is reinforcing the harmful false dichotomy. The real crime is is pretending that you can't be Muslim and queer because that's a false dichotomy. Like you can't, you can't make this stuff up.
Well, you
Like the
can
real
clearly,
crime,
if
well,
for enough
obviously,
money. Yeah.
like the real crime is the silencing of Muslims, of queer Muslims. And then, but wait, there's more.
Who do you think does that?
Well, it's obviously something in the greater zeitgeist, it's something about, well, I think we actually, look, let me read the next slide
Yeah,
because
go.
we may
Yeah.
find out whose fault it is, right? Um, okay, the next one, it's not okay, so I think this is still a quote from the same lady. Many people these days are under the opinion that Islam has always been opposed to gender diversity and queerness. So we're not talking
Which
about gay at all
they're
anymore.
completely made up things.
They're
Both
made
of
up
them.
things.
They're both
Yeah,
made up by government. Gender diversity is made up,
it's not
and
real.
queerness is made up. Queerness is the governmental version of what was gay. It's the governmental appropriation of the political capital of gay people because gay people have political capital. Let's not forget, underneath this whole pile of bullshit
And
are lesbians and gay men. Lesbians who have been
who
horribly
stood
oppressed in
who stood
society.
up for their rights, for decades
Yep. And
and
one.
said, yeah, right?
Yeah. And we had a whole thing in society where we thought, you know what? Maybe we shouldn't treat these people like this. Maybe we should accept it,
Mm.
which is the Western society. Let's give ourselves a little bit of credit, particularly on the left. We were one of the first progressive societies to do this. And we all assumed it would all go to the Middle East, which it was starting to before Islamic extremism. There's no mention here of the actual, we don't know who murdered this man,
We don't know. We
but
don't.
if there was Islamic extremists, which is possible, it's one of the myriad possibilities.
Look,
One of the possibilities is
it
that it was a right-wing extremist who hated queer people and gender diversity. The other option is that it might have been his
a
own
right-wing
people.
Islamic extremist who hated, like, we don't know.
We don't know. Although
And
those
this
organizations
whole,
usually come forward and say it was me.
well, okay, so let me go on.
Terrorist
And
organizations.
again, we're just still quoting the same one researcher. So this
Yeah.
isn't an article. This is just like a distilled ideology.
There's
Um,
no research under this. There's no information. There's just this person who is obviously a write-up. She's called a trans Muslim. Oh no, says trans. Yeah, she's a trans Muslim writer. So probably a man.
it could even be a man. Yeah, there's like a
Let me
blurry
just. Is
photograph
there a
of
photograph?
a it.
Yeah, that's a man. Yeah,
Yeah, it's. Oh, you think that's okay?
I
It's
think.
just a
Well,
very blurry photograph of someone who looks like a woman. But
trans Muslim, and it's a
oh,
picture of some
oh,
person in a hijab. So
oh,
100% that's a man.
okay. There you go.
Yeah. So that person is
I'm gonna
appropriating.
Google. I'm gonna
They're
Google
appropriating the
that.
oppression of women. They're appropriating the oppression of gays, and they're appropriating the oppression of Muslims. So
And
this is a person who's appropriated three kinds of oppression and is just a bloke.
and the ABC are just regurgitating whatever it is that's being written.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. Um, History tells a different story, one that lies long buried beneath layers of colonial influence and contemporary fundamentalism. Okay, so we know that fundamentalism is code word for Christianity, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, so that's not Muslim fundamentalism, it's Christian fundamentalism, usually, when the ABC is saying it.
And let
And
me
then,
just this
yeah,
person, Azia Sarin,
yeah.
is in the path of the Cyclone as well. He's
Oh no, hope he's
from
okay.
Queensland University, serves as one of the board members of Australia GLB TQIA Multicultural Council. Her research includes fields in political science and history, decolonization to LGBTQI and Islam with a focus on improving social inequality, promoting cultural relativism and social responsibilities concept. Being an intersectional feminist allows her to understand the depths of how people's social identities can create overlapping inequalities and discrimination. The photo of him here seems, yeah, it's a little bit more masculine. Uh, he's from the
Yeah.
University of Queensland Australian School of Social Science, graduate student. Yeah.
And
Sorry, go on. Yep.
going on, who does this fellow blame for the silencing of the queers? Before European colonization reshaped Muslim societies around rigid Victorian ideals, trans and non-binary individuals were recognized and respected in many Islamic cultures. So we're no longer talking about gay at all. Gay was 3 slides ago. Like the oppression of gays, the attitudes of Islam as a religion toward gays and Muslim culture toward gays, that's gone. We're now only talking about trans and non-binary people,
Yes.
right? So, yeah, so we absolutely have just totally erased gays from the conversation about a gay man being brutally murdered in broad daylight,
Yeah. By some
right?
privileged academic. I've just sent you another picture of him. He's the one in the middle. I'll put the picture up. Fairly typical.
Oh,
Look at the
yes.
boobs.
There's a lot of breasts in that photograph.
There is.
Oh
Don't look
God.
entirely.
They don't look real though. I think
They
there's
look stuck together. So maybe it's
they
just a man's
they
chest who's had the
I
thing.
think they looks like silicon to me.
Yeah, it does. He looks
Yeah.
a little bit made up. I mean, God forbid that.
Well, anyway, I'll put that into our show notes on Substack so that
Yeah,
you can get the full picture. Because I had to see it, so you have to see it
yeah. So we're doing research as we go. We
as we
haven't done
go.
any
We're
homework.
doing the Joe Rogan
Yeah,
experiment.
yeah. I just found his Instagram. Um,
Oh my God.
and it's as you can imagine. Oh my God, they've got the kefir on. Oh,
Yeah,
it's
so
yeah,
yeah. So look, that's I really wanted to have a chat about this because the ABC even though on its main website there is an article about this and it's marginally more fleshed out and it does have a little bit more information about it. It's
Mm,
not much better. Um, and they have this and they have this Instagram feed that for a lot of people will be all the news that they consume,
mm,
right? Because it's couched and it's wrapped up as, oh, look, this is the queer news. This is what you as a queer person, whatever that means, need to know about what's happening in the queer sphere. Maybe I should trademark queer sphere.
we should call
Um,
this whole program Queer Sphere.
I couldn't live with myself. And but you can see like just how utterly like it appropriates and covers up and repackages actual tragedies and actual political events that have meaning in the world. And it platforms these insane academics
These
who
weirdos.
take like real world example, like real world things that have happened that are horrible, and it packages them up into this like little bite-sized bit of intersectional wordplay.
Mm,
And then people receive that and they're like, oh, yeah, that gay imam was shot. And it definitely was the fault of Victorian colonialism
yeah,
somehow. And you can see like people, it's so confusing and it's so glamorizing. You
yeah,
get to the end of the article and how how do you actually like if you were to walk away and you were to try to explain this to somebody,
yeah.
you might start with, well, that person was shot and it's the fault of Victorian colonialism, heteronormativity.
Mm.
And someone says, oh wow, how did that happen? You have no tools to explain what you are talking about. You just have to
Well,
accept that's the truth that you've been given. Like the
they
ABC has
they use these
utterly
experts, don't they?
failed. They failed to give you the tools to understand the world.
Well, they claim to be the tool.
They are
That's
the
what
tool.
they are, the tool in more ways than one. They are a bunch of tools who you're supposed to use to understand the world. And there's a picture I just sent you on this
Stop sending
guy's,
me pictures of
I
this
know, they're
guy.
gross, on Instagram, and I'll put it up. He's got the
Oh
kafir,
God.
and the
Yeah.
let's have a little hear from this expert that they use. The movements against Zionism and colonialism go hand in hand with queer freedom.
Oh,
The rights of others to exist are not superseded by our alienation right to LGBTQ right to exist. Since when did the LGBTQIA community need to be liberated from a campaign of bombing on defenseless civilians?
what?
It,
Can you say
Need to
that
be
again?
liberated from. Since when did the LG, this is obviously a comment on Israel-Palestine, since when did the LGBTQIA community need to be liberated from a campaign of bombing on defenseless civilians? Queer and trans liberation, like all forms of liberation, cannot be achieved through violence and oppression and the absence of justice, equality, and respect for human dignity. What what about Islamic extremism is not devoid of human dignity? I mean, these are the worst people. These are like Nazis because they literally kill and rape women. Since when? Since when did the rape of women be needed to liberate Palestinians?
It's such a statement that's like just devoid of reality.
And
If you're
soaked
being
in
bombed,
privilege.
you need to be rescued from being bombed.
You do, yeah.
I don't care what color you are, who you have sex with, or whatever, what you call yourself, whether you wear a dress or not. If you're being bombed, I would say that you probably need to be rescued from being bombed.
Oh, these people are,
It's
oh,
it's such an ornate, I bet he sort of stays awake at night drinking coffee, like wondering how he's going to line these words up really, really well together so
hmm,
that they sort of flow. Um,
yeah.
but it means nothing.
No, it's a narrative that's based on uh the testimony of the worst people And this guy is the worst person. He's pretending that the oppression of women in which is of no consequence to this guy. This guy was born in
In the West, yeah.
Gaza, in some place of like Iran. He would be just a man who had access to all the best privileges. In Iran,
And
he could transition quite happily and the state would pay for it. There's no, the oppression of women to these people is just fodder. They just appropriate the oppression of women and the oppression of gays to promote a narrative which shuts us up. These are the people that want to shut us up about the fact that our bodies matter to our oppression. Our bodies are central to our oppression. These people will never acknowledge that because they are government hacks. They are part of a massive grift where they get paid to by the government to go on about this absolute bunch of bullshit. I'll tell you what I really think in a minute.
I was going to say, you sound pretty upset.
I am very annoyed. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I spent a
It's
little bit of time in the Queensland University Social Science Library. I was going to transfer over there, but it wasn't progressive enough for me. I was very in a very progressive degree, and I thought the progressives were going to change the world. We were going to take over the government and make everything better. But of course, it's the lie, isn't it? Because once they take over the government,
you are
they
the
make
government.
everything worse.
You like once you take over the government, like you're
You
just
are the
part of the
oppressor.
machine and you're just feeding your ideology into the machine.
Yeah,
Um,
it's
and
gross.
look, I think, I think once upon a time you probably did think that, that you could feed a positive ideology
Yeah,
into the machine.
and it's okay
Um,
to acknowledge you're wrong
and
about something at some point in your life.
yeah.
It
Like it's
it's
it's so optimistic. It's such an optimistic kind of idea that, we change and we can like soften the narratives of government, and we can soften the government apparatus, and we could make it more human.
mm.
But I think it's just made it more difficult to navigate. Like a government apparatus is not human.
No, it's an administrative structure, which was what I said this
Yeah.
week to someone who said, "Oh, we are the government. We just made up. Government's just made up of us." It's like, no, the
Well,
government is an administrative apparatus which we have built to govern our issues, and it's the most dangerous. It can be a murderous tool, and that's why we have liberalism. It's why we have systems of checks and balances against oppression, against tyranny. And these people are just enacting tyranny, and they're doing it through sleight of hand, through by pretending like any tyrannous leader. They always pretend that they're going to do it for the good of the people.
mm,
There's never been a tyrannous leader who hasn't claimed that they're going to do this wonderful thing because they have a special knowledge and they're going to make everything better for everybody, and they always make everything worse.
it's so patronizing and, dare I say, patriarchal,
It
to
is,
use that
yeah.
word.
Yeah,
It's so
always.
patronizing because, and it's not like the traditional father who's telling you what's good for you and telling you to
Mm,
eat your vegetables. Like it's the queer father who's telling
yeah,
you that like you need to be intersectional, and you need to go to Mardi Gras, and you need to do all
yeah.
of these things. Like, but it's still patronizing, and
It is, yeah.
um it's still someone, like it's still an authority figure who knows better than you do what
Mm,
you should think and what you should want and what you should do.
yeah. And we do need to follow the money, and the money from this comes from the government. It's
It
funded by
100% does.
it's
Yeah.
funded by taxpayers, and it's funded by a group of elites who are in the government who really are part of an international movement.
I think well, what we were going to talk about this week, I did a little bit of research about the Doge developments.
Hmm.
Um so I didn't really come to anything that I thought was like useful or interesting to say though. That you kind of couldn't get elsewhere.
Yeah.
But it's like, it just continually strikes me that the um, Doge is looking into like auditing um, the United States Agency for International Development, um, which is like, by all accounts, has engaged in, and they had a conversation, Joe Rogan and Elon Musk had a conversation about whether or not it's waste or fraud, right? And there's a difference between waste and fraud.
Yes.
Um, and it
It's
looks like it's
intent.
probably
Intent
a
is the
little bit of
difference.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
intent is important in the law.
just like how they had shocking accounting practices. So they were like releasing millions of dollars to different charities without review process,
Mm.
without actually like recording line items against what the payments were for.
Yeah, I saw that.
Um,
Yeah, just
or
basic
even
bureaucracy. Yeah.
following like periodic review of like, do we still need this thing? Do we still need this transgender opera
Mm.
in Colombia?
Yeah.
Is this, or checking against counterterrorism databases,
Mm.
um, or just following prompts like, does this funding fund something that is not aligned with the country's security objectives,
Mm.
right? So by all accounts, like there's a lot of waste and mismanagement and possibly fraud going on in that sphere. And what I find interesting is how vehemently the government, like the Democrat apparatus, is against it. How
Yeah. Well, the some
like
of it's a grift. Some of it's just a regular grift.
some of it's just a regular grift. And just like and the thing is, there are so many people on that gravy train
Mm.
whose jobs are going to evaporate. And these are
That's right.
not
Yeah.
starving people. There are middle class
These
queer
are good guys like
activists,
this. I looked at his
right?
Instagram pictures. I won't subject
Yeah,
you to
whose
anymore,
jobs are gonna
but
go.
he's going to parties. He's having champagne at LGB events. He's advertising. He's talking to the ABC. He's getting his articles quoted in mainstream media. He's going to the protests. He's got himself in his keffiyeh looking like a big dickhead. It's all part of a grift. Without that, what's his job going to be? Like, he's obviously getting paid as a research academic. I mean, I've done that job. When you do graduate, the academics will pick you and they'll say, "Look, do you want to do some research work?" And it's good money. Um, yeah. So without that grift, that's the
And
end of it.
and without the need for this nuanced understanding of privilege and oppression, who needs
Yeah.
his research position,
Yeah,
right?
because
No
he's an
one.
idiot. He's got
No
no
one.
structure. This is essentially a religious ideology. There's it's a belief system. It's a belief system that it's quite simple. The oppression is on a scale, and that systems of oppression run through the heart of humanity. And if only we can use the tools, the cultural tools of control, we can teach everyone to be better. It's basically a social constructionist concept, but it doesn't, there's no research to it. There's no structure to it. There's no real benefit. Only what all they research is what people say that will fit into their narrative. It's
Mm.
completely corrupted. There's no, and people are right to come against it, and we're going to get the backlash as feminists. They're saying, oh, this is your feminism. They associate us with this big dickhead
Oh,
and his ridiculous ideas. Um, I need to stop scrolling through his Instagram. It's
yeah, it's
making
making
me
you angry.
it's making
Well,
me physically sick,
I mean,
frankly.
it puts me in mind of, I don't know if any of our listeners watched again, I'm coming out with the controversies today. I watched the Matt Walsh movie, Am I Racist? Right?
Hope you didn't
And
pay for it, Kit
I
Kowalski.
I cannot well, no, I didn't.
Good,
I personally did not do any piracy, but I did not pay either.
perfect.
Um
I approve of some piracy.
yeah, so look, I want to hear what Matt Walsh has to say about this. But part of the movie was kind of attacking the idea of like this systemic racism and, etc.,
Yeah.
right? Um, but a large chunk of the movie was taking aim at the government activist complex, right? The so one of the things that they did was they engaged activists in speaking engagements, right? And then on the screen underneath, while they're talking, and they're just talking complete nonsense.
Mm.
And they're saying, check your privilege, your white privilege, you're a this, you're a that, and quite, saying some stuff that is fairly incoherent.
Mm.
And then on the bottom of the screen, they charged $15,000 for this interview, right? So this is part of like what Doge is attacking is like the marketplace for these activists to come in and
Mm.
tell you how to think about things,
Yeah,
right?
consultants.
Yeah. If we don't have a need for like this nuanced, like intersectional analysis, well,
Mm.
these people are going to lose their jobs. They're going to lose
Yeah.
their grift, right? If we go back to a situation where we look, we think, and we say, is that racism? Is that discrimination? Is that homophobic? Is it misogynist?
Mm.
Like, and use like more of a reasonable person test. If we go back to that, we don't need these consultants.
Well, what they do, the actual service they provide, is they provide a rationale for government intervention into the cultural lives of humans, of the population it's supposed to serve. It provides a kind of church of state where they claim to have a moral superiority over the population, who actually in a democracy, the people are the conscience of the state. Because the state has got no conscience and will go to rationality, and we see that with some of the excesses of the kind of assisted dying stuff, where if we
Yeah.
left that to the state, they would just knock off old people. So we see that in Canada, some of it's going a little bit much, because that's the nature of the state. The nature of the state is to be efficient. It can take on these ideologies and just, you know, pretty much enact tyranny over the people. So these people provide a rationale for all of that. They provide a rationale for government to be in a superior position and have its own rationale within it, while and resist the accountability of the people. They're
Mm.
consultants because they're resisting the accountability of actually asking people what to think. Because you can ask, I think Douglas Murray was has highlighted a number of times. You can ask the Muslims what they think about these things, and they will tell you. And why aren't they an expert on their own religion? Why is the ABC an expert on authentic Islam? Why is this
Well,
trans queer person an expert on authentic Islam? Why not ask the Muslims? Why not be grassroots and go
well,
and ask them?
he supposedly is a Muslim, and he's the most authorized Muslim because he's the minority of the minority of the minority.
Yeah, he's got a
You know,
degree and
he's yeah,
yeah,
he can really talk about the intersections. Um,
yes.
like once upon a time, we would actually say, yeah, like let's get the majority view. Let's
Yeah,
go ask
yeah,
the
let's ask the
actual
people. Yeah,
majority. Yeah.
yeah, and
Or
see if they're
let's talk to the leader who has the majority following. But
yeah,
now we need to get the nuanced view.
yeah. Well, they
And the
do that.
ABC just shoves it down our throats. Like,
They were doing that with the church as well, when they were trying to say that they were the most abusive. But the people they asked was the women who had been abused by Christian men,
mm,
um, which is great.
yeah.
I'm in favor of talking to women who have been abused in the church. I mean, I'm gone down a bit of a rabbit hole recently about um, the Christian broadcasting channel. It's called something Star, Gold Star, something or other, um, which is completely corrupt. I'm in favor of exposing all that stuff. I'm in favor of exposing abuse in the church, child sexual abuse particularly. And let's ask the victims about that. But they don't kind of do that with Islam. They don't go down
No.
to the mosque and say, brother, what do you think about gays? And are you going to participate in the Mardi Gras next week? Um, they don't do it because they know what they're going to say. They're going to find that a lot of regular Muslims uh, have got views which are not necessarily, um, coinciding with the progressive narrative.
It's always funny when you're talking to someone who's um like say of a minority religion, right? Um and you're having a conversation about this and that, and then they come out with something that's like really bigoted, right?
Yeah,
And it's discombobulating
yeah.
because like in my mind at least there is like that affinity, you're a minority, you're sticking to with other minorities, and it always faces me when I hear someone say something really bigoted against, it's often against gays, to be honest.
Mm.
um they just, it's a false narrative that if you're in a minority you believe in the rights of everybody else on the fact of them also being in a minority.
It does sometimes shock you, but you should be prepared to hear them as well and be realistic about. We need to be realistic about the Muslim community and whether they have a problem, particularly with women. Um, because, a few years ago, I was involved with a domestic violence case. My husband's from a Muslim family. His father was a violent man. There is a certain entitlement among some people from the Middle East, not just Muslim, but from the Middle East, that men have got some sort of right to exercise violent authority in their family. And if that is the case, like that's just a thing I've just told you, and you may not believe it, other people may not believe it. But if that is the case, we should be in dialogue with the Muslim community about how they're treating women and the narratives that they're perpetuating in their own community. Because according to the ABC, that's what causes violence is gender oppression. So if there is
Mm.
a gender oppression, if there are making narratives that yeah, sort of lean into the inferiority of women, then we need to be talking about this.
Yeah, and it just goes to show like there's the in like the utter uselessness of these narratives.
Mm, yeah,
Like um how they they're fine when you're in that left-wing Ultimo bubble and everybody has been to university and everybody has studied like intersectionalism and everybody's gone to the same like prayer group socialist meetings.
yeah,
But as soon as you step out of that, those narratives, they don't equip you for critical thinking. They
no,
equip you to promulgate the ideology, right?
yeah,
And
which is what they're intended to do.
well, and they literally equip you to dismiss anyone who questions, who
Mm.
asks you how it happens, who disagrees with that being the mechanism. Um,
Well, they give the
and
tools to do it because you can say they're Islamophobic. They'll say for instance, with my criticism, and I might say that there's some of this stuff that exists in Islamic, well, you're Islamophobic because that's not genuine Islam, because that's the real key in this story. If I can find it, um, is they're talking about the authentic, the history, and they do this thing I was talking about last week. They go back in history and they say, well, there's this tribe of Muslim people who accepted gender diversity and queer people because they let the men, usually it's at they let the men dress up as women.
and the picture is of two, I mean, I don't want to necessarily say they're unattractive women, but they're sort of broad-foreheaded women,
Yeah,
in like a draped head covering.
like
Just really wonder, like, how did they know that those were trans women?
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
How could they tell that was a picture of trans women?
yeah. Well, and there are examples in society where there were letting usually homosexual men dress up as
Yeah,
women,
dress up and
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 just because
fulfill the social role, right?
they didn't want them in masculinity, so they put them in with the women, which
Mm.
is what they're doing with what's this guy's name? Which is what the academic is actually doing. He is he doesn't want to be performing the responsibilities of masculinity. So he's in with the women and he calls himself a woman. Everyone calls that's what the gender trans ideology is. It's they erase women in order for men who are not particularly masculine to escape within women's cultural meanings. So,
And of
you know,
course,
they say,
yeah.
oh, well, we have found this culture. Therefore, our culture is not true. It's not authentic. The true authentic Islam is the Islam that accepts all the men in the lady fields dresses.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things with that. And like one of them is just the utter refusal to accept like the present day reality as being something that exists and is real. Or like, yeah, society and culture, religions, they've changed over time. Country borders have changed over time.
Yeah.
The inhabitants of Australia have changed over time. But, guess what? There are wars fought, there are winners, there are losers. And we can say, oh, once upon a time, the Roman Empire,
Mm,
stretched from here to here, the Ottoman Empire stretched from there to there. Um, so does that mean that Italy doesn't exist today, Britain doesn't exist today, Turkey
no.
doesn't exist today? No, we
We've
live
modern
in we live today,
we've
right?
nation states are
It's
new inventions. The nation
like,
state is an invention of the modern world.
yeah. But
And
this idea that, oh, once upon a time
yeah, well they're
we had a
true.
culture. That's the true culture. And
Yeah.
what you see before you today is the mirage, it's the matrix, it's not real, it's
Uh, it's
it's not the authentic
a weird sort of
culture.
ethno-nationalism too, isn't it? You
So
know,
weird.
like this always was, always will be. No one's explained to me how that's not ethno-nationalism.
Oh, it
And
is. It
the
is.
whole, Palestinian things, they say, oh, we were here first. Were you? And then when they sort of show evidence that the Jews were there, oh, but this was they try and root the genetics of someone in a location, which is ethnic
And
nationalism.
again, like the argument, like if you say, well, that's ethno-nationalism, and I disagree with that for these reasons,
Mm.
I don't
Especially in
support,
the modern,
yeah,
nation state.
like,
We're supposed to
you
leave that
know,
behind, yeah?
we're supposed to say no to that, and we're
Mm.
supposed to say no to fascism. We're supposed to say no to ethno-nationalism. I'm saying that as though like I don't really want to say no to it, but
Well, it's okay in like
like,
Japan. I mean,
yeah,
some countries are still, um, they choose to have their borders in an ethnic definition, and that's fine, but we can't do that.
well,
Because it's
like it,
impossible in Australia, in Britain, in places.
we
And
can't
one
do
one
it
of the
here.
reasons, no, one
We
of the
we
reasons
can't
is
do it.
because of colonialism.
Yeah,
Yes, we did.
yeah,
I'm Irish genetically. I haven't done the genetic test, but I think I've done the research. I can guarantee that I would be almost 80 or 90% Irish. My ancestors are all from that little spot and they were driven out by food insecurity. These guys don't want to talk about food security. They don't want to talk about practical things, about why wars start, and they want to, it's all in the culture for them. It's all in the hatred of man. It's all in
yeah.
they don't want to think
But they
about
want
clean
to.
water or,
They don't think about like they don't think about like what's the politics behind it. Like, is it ethno-nationalism? Is it good? Is that what we want?
yeah, it's no
But
structure
instead
to
we
their
we think
argument.
about the little guy and the big guy, you
Mm,
know,
it's
the
very simplistic.
traditionally the inclusive and the exclusive, the
Yeah.
you know, the people who recognize the queer and non-binary versus the people who say, no, no, that's actually not a part of the culture
It's
anymore.
not
No.
a thing. And the
Um,
the good people and the bad people. I'll just read this last one before we leave it because I know that's your job, but this is hilarious. I just flicked to the next thing and it made me laugh. Imam Muslims murder forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. You ready to be faced with this
I'm
uncomfortable truth?
I'm bracing for it.
Brace yourself.
Bracing.
Our Muslim institutions, like yours and mine, our Muslim institutions have failed LGBTQIA plus Muslims. Their
Shocker.
silence is not just cowardice, it's complicity.
They hate complicity, don't they?
Yeah,
And this idea that, oh, sorry, but this idea that that's a shock to anyone, right? That there aren't some cultures that actually reject you. There
That's
aren't
right.
some
Yeah.
cultures. There are some cultures that reject me. There are some cultures that reject queer, trans, non-binary,
That
homosexual people,
that have some rules about
right?
sexuality that are not the same as the ABC. That I'm going to go down the road and drive past the Malcravat Mosque one day and find that it's draped in the
In
progress
the flag.
flag.
Oh, look, stranger things have happened. I mean,
It's unlikely. I
but
mean, the Uniting Church, yes, but no.
that like there are cultures that reject me, right? There are. There are
Yes.
places I'm not allowed to go,
And
or I
because you're a
I could
female,
go
mostly.
mostly. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm yes, right?
Mm.
And or
Uh,
places that I could
and also,
go if I behaved myself in a different way.
that's right. Yeah. And normal things like you're not married. Can we say that out loud?
I'm not married, no.
Yes. And that's a choice you've made. But if you decided to go and get married, you couldn't get married in a Catholic church. I mean, I don't know. Are you
No.
Catholic? No.
I know
I
I'm
couldn't
not
get married.
Catholic.
I couldn't get married in a Catholic church. They would reject me. They did reject me because I saw one that was pretty all those years ago. I thought, oh, like wouldn't mind that one. No, they won't let. I can't take communion, and I could pretend. They wouldn't. They don't have a they don't check my
They
registration of
don't
Christian.
check. I mean, they don't do
No,
genital checks
but
either.
I
So,
respect their beliefs. So when I go to a Catholic church, which I don't do very often, and they have communion, I don't take it, even though I take communion in my own church, because I know they don't want me to. What they do, you do this thing, and they give you a blessing.
oh, okay, right. I didn't
So
know
I do
that.
that. I quite like a blessing. It's nice. But I don't feel like they have oppressed me on any deep level. If
Yeah.
they might worry for my soul. They might think that I'm going to end up in the hot place. Um, that doesn't bother me at all. Why do they worry so much? Like it says here, it sends a chilling message that queer and trans Muslims do not matter, that our suffering is not worthy of recognition, that our deaths will not be mourned. And this bloke, to try and liberate himself in his own community, meaning the
Yeah.
Muslim community, he goes to the university, goes to the ABC, goes to all the white people and gets white people narratives to blame all the white people and then gets them all point to his, to then put cultural pressure based on this thing on the Muslims to accept gay and trans people. Let's not worry about women because
I mean,
this
like
guy doesn't give
that's
a shit about women.
no,
He is just,
no.
he's appropriating all our oppression. He's pretending to be a woman, which he's not. He's obviously, just LARPing. He's a professional liar,
Mm.
but he's an expert in imaginary oppression. They have to invent imaginary oppression in order to raise real oppression.
So I think we've
Yeah, we've
roundly
done that.
discussed why this guy is and why ABC Queer is supremely suspect. Like
Yeah,
I can't get over it. Like, this poor bloke has been murdered and
yeah.
they're just using it to score woke points,
Take away their
really.
money
Like,
is all I can say.
yeah.
And I don't believe in forcing religions to accept things that their religion doesn't accept. I believe that those people should be respectful to other people. I'm all in favor of gay people. I don't believe in trans people. I think it's an imaginary thing. But if we
Mm.
can just take that back to gay, I'm in favor of gay people developing a theology where they can have a relationship with God. Why? There's nothing about that that's offensive to me.
Mm.
I may not, some of it, especially when some of these churches, or particularly government sort of adjacent churches like in the UK, um, the Church of England, they make narratives that are based in philosophy that I don't agree with that should be imposed on the Bible. But that's not all the that's not the only people that are sort of trying to develop a theology where they can have a relationship with God. I've got no problem with that. I do it myself in terms of uh, feminist doctrine. Um, so I don't want to, when I've said that about the church, and I don't want to make it seem like I'm not in favor of being able to discuss these issues in the church, and for Muslims to be able to try and dialogue with their own religion about these issues. But
Mm.
this is not what this is. This is not that. This is another
Well, I
level of
think that,
nonsense.
and again, like it's about how we deal with those cultural conflicts, right?
Mm.
So, I'm not religious. I don't really have much of a bother about people, I don't really mind if gay
You
people want to
tolerate
commune
me?
with God or not. I do. That like that's I think that's like the least difference between us, really. I don't see
Yeah.
it as
We
being,
we both think you shouldn't kill people for it.
yeah. And
I
I
think it's an indignity to gun someone down the street
absolutely.
because
Um,
they're gay.
and like on the one hand, I can see how the church has had such an integral part of like the history of Western democracy, or like various churches have, right? And on
Hmm.
the other hand, I can see how I I personally think that we need to be a secular society,
Hmm.
and I think that we
Particularly a
need to be
secular state.
free.
Maybe not a secular
Yeah,
society, a secular state.
a
Yeah.
secular, definitely a secular state.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that people have the right to have their own beliefs, right
Hmm.
or wrong.
Hmm.
Like being, um, not being religious, it's really important to me to be tolerant, right, of other
Yeah.
people's beliefs, because I want people to be tolerant of my lack of belief,
Yeah.
So I don't want to be forced to go to Sunday school. I don't want my kids to be forced to go and do religious studies,
No.
right? But if they're interested in it, I'm happy for them to be a part of it.
Yeah.
I'm happy to have the dialogue about religion.
Yeah.
Um,
And
what I'm
you,
not happy for is to be told that questioning a religion is a phobia, asking questions about a religion, or happening to notice that um, that when a country has an Islamic revolution, for some reason women get beheaded in the street for playing sport, right? And just questioning that. I'm not
yeah,
I'm
that's
not
a really
ready to be
bad
called
thing.
that
Yeah.
that's a phobia,
No.
right? So
And with the amount of, I don't know, the statistics someone showed me a few days ago, and I've forgotten, of how many Christians are murdered by Islamic extremism. We're one of the biggest targets for
yeah.
Islamic extremist regimes, and the majority of Christians who get murdered by their faith get murdered by Islamic extremists. That's a reality of our existence.
Wow.
Not my existence here in Brisbane. Um, I'm more likely to be murdered by this storm that's about to hit us than by Islamic extremists, I think, depending on whether any of them get hold of this podcast. Um, but it is a reality, and it's something that people can
Well,
legitimately be frightened of. It's
like
not an irrational fear.
Katie Hopkins had a didn't Katie Hopkins have a fatwa out on her? She's
Yeah,
I don't know. She's like this really extreme right wing, quite obnoxious celebrity from the UK.
she is obnoxious, yeah.
Um,
And she's a bit
and
funny. I remember seeing
she's
something and I thought she's funny. She does have
but she had
something.
I remember seeing an interview with her, and she was talking about how she actually had I think that there was a price on her head. Like she had someone
Yeah.
in her
She
house at one point with a sword.
did she? Oh, I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah. She
yeah.
certainly upset a lot of people. One of
She's
the things
she's
I think
upsets
about
everybody.
Katie
Like,
Hopkins is it really does show. I think she lost a house at one point because she was being
yeah.
sued, and she really did. It's women who like you get right wing guys a dime a dozen, who say outrageous things, but women really who come out in that sort of space really get hammered, or used to. I think it's a lot easier now, but certainly that's one of the things, I can't help taking the feminist perspective on it. But yeah, she disproportionately did get attacked more than just the irregular right-wing guys.
I'm having a look at her Wikipedia now, and I think I might have to re like reserve any further comment because there's a
Uh,
lot of information here.
yeah,
I think I have to read something before
yeah, and it's
I,
probably not true.
I
Half
say
that with
anything else.
Wikipedia
I
about
don't know.
right-wingers isn't true.
There's a lot of like stuff about her and Islam, and she's gotten sued by someone, and she says all sorts of stuff. Um,
Yeah, well, she started out with that
yeah.
anti-fat thing. Do you remember that years ago?
Oh
She
yeah.
had a little show on the BBC, or not BBC, might have been Channel 4, but some sort of mainstream thing where she was saying this controversial thing that people shouldn't be fat, and she gained weight. Then she took it off. I can't remember, but
No,
that was
poor
how
thing.
she originally she gained weight for the documentary. That's how she became famous. Another thing that brings to mind, talking about right-wing weirdo women, um, I've been watching the Andrew Tate thing. What's that famous, really pretty young black woman who we all thought was reasonable until she turned out to be an East Dominican lunatic? Candace Owens.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she's interviewed Tate and is all handsy with him. And apparently her husband knows him. And she's a Catholic. She's converted to Catholicism. Um, Anyone that would sit down with that man. I'm not a cancel culture person, but that guy,
I
what?
don't understand the appeal. And
I don't.
I don't understand anything about the Tates. Um,
No.
I'll
Well, Nathan
just,
Livingston, I've been following him. I call him the Milky Bar Kid, but he runs Milk Bar TV. Um, just because you know, it just is what comes to mind. He's been posting a bit about it, and I listened to a space that he was on with a couple of guys who were kind of experts in this area. And I've become interested because it's kind of splitting the right between conservatives and the anti-feminist. Because of course, Andrew Tate, is it Andrew
mm,
Tate?
Andrew
Is
Tate. Yeah.
is anti-feminist because he's a sex trafficker, and allegedly, allegedly a sex trafficker,
Allegedly.
allegedly a rapist.
And I think he hasn't been convicted of any crime. So it's
No, he's
one of the
been
things I
saying it
don't,
out loud.
it's the one thing I don't understand about it is like, if this is common knowledge, why hasn't he been arrested and convicted? Like,
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
it's hard, right?
understand anything.
It's hard to convict. And of course, certain countries are very misogynistic and patriarchal. I mean, oh, God forbid, some idiot wrote some article on Substack that someone sent me as a joke because it's a person who's blocked me and they're a moron about what she called patriarchal feminism. Pat feminism. She tried to make a little word out of it that she thinks it's going to catch on. Um, Basically got nothing better to do in the gender wars than to criticize people on her own side who use the word patriarchy in ways that she considers inappropriate. But some countries are patriarchal, they are run by men. And even our system, it's very difficult to get a conviction for sex trafficking, for rape. Almost all rape goes without conviction. And
Yeah.
it certainly is not the case that the innocent until proven guilty. That's a legal principle, but it's not the truth in real life. Um, it took me years to go to court about what happened to me, and before there was a conviction, he was still guilty. He
Mhm.
was always guilty.
Yeah.
So these, rapists are still rapists even when they're not convicted. It just means they're not convicted. But the difficulty of convicting is that we do have a system, a legal system where there is a presumption of innocence when the court is underway, and that's a good thing for our system. But it causes a tremendous amount of problems because rape is almost always um, occurred in secret.
It's a hidden
People don't do
crime.
it generally out in the street. They do it privately, and there's usually only two witnesses. Um,
Mm.
so, I mean, obviously, Tate's openly admitted, he's on camera several times admitting the way he treats women. So I think he's a monster, and he's very dangerous. And anyone who supports him, basically, I would consider um, someone who I wouldn't have any respect for. That's a
Yeah.
very mild
Which is
statement.
not which is not cancel culture, is it?
No, it's not cancel culture. No,
No.
no, you're allowed to cancel rapists, I
You're
think.
well, I think you're absolutely allowed to say that you have a suspicion or a lack of respect for someone
Mm,
who like associates with a known sex trafficker, and without it being canceling.
yeah.
I think that's pretty straightforward. That's like
Radical,
the
a
difference.
radical feminist position.
That's like the difference between, voting, like voting with your feet, so, or, taking notice of facts and reputation, and putting it, and the difference between like going on a reputation um versus trying to put cultural analysis into this like um privilege framework, right? So, on the one hand, like we can use that privilege framework. We can say, oh, that's Islamophobia, that's racism, that's misogyny, that's taterphobia. You're simply taterphobic, right?
I would be
You,
tatophobic if
you're
I was a young
bigoted.
woman and I was in a room with him. I certainly
Yeah.
would be tatophobic. Yeah, I would
Or, but,
be terrified.
and like,
And
let's cancel him versus, um, just saying, well, we're right to observe what people are saying and to be
yeah,
wary.
and to
Like
warn
it's very
young women,
righteous.
it's our
Yeah.
job to warn young women. This type of man, when he's saying these things, he's not saying them because he's a big tough guy. He's saying them because, in all probability, this is a violent sex offender who will abuse you and exploit your sexual your body. I don't want to say sexual labor because it goes into that um,
Sex work.
terrible narrative. Yeah. And we have a right to warn young women about dangerous and
Mm.
violent men because the most dangerous people to young women are men. That's just the
Yeah.
that's the reality of life.
Unfortunately, it's and that's not something that is an abstract analysis. That's something
No.
that's, borne out in statistics about reality,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Also, want to mention that
Yeah.
tonight on Sky News we have as we brace for the cyclone here, we also have an expose. Carolyn Marcus is running on sport. Um,
Oh, yeah.
she's exposing all the stuff that we talked about. How long ago did we play that Riley Dennis stuff?
Can't even, can't even
Maybe a
count.
year ago.
Yeah.
When that stuff was coming out, we thought, well, this will be a great expose. Of course, no media have ever picked it up, but good on Sky for picking it up. I just saw her interview with Laura Jays, which was I can't stand Laura Jays. She's just one of these fake kind of faux intellectual journalists and started to grill her. She said to her, well, how many are we talking about of these? Because they're talking about the flying bats we've talked about, which is made up of four or five. There's four or five trans-identified males in that team.
Yeah, I think that's, yeah, yeah,
Some
at
huge
least.
amount, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and they have absolutely blitzed. They're undefeated. They got the trophy. They've allegedly injured women. That's been on camera. They've been caught on camera. They have had people in the league who refuse to play against them. One of the reasons they want is some people just won't play against them because for their own safety. Anyways, Laura Jays was saying, there's serious, how many people like trying to fall into that narrative of it's only a small amount. Well, she said, well, in this team, there's like five of them and they're
Mm.
undefeated and they're injuring women. And this is some footage of one of their big brutes, who was a famous YouTuber. Um, and this has happened. And she said, oh, well, and then she starts to put another problematic, like she doesn't show any, oh, well, that's that's quite a
That's
lot there,
actually
isn't
quite
it?
bad.
That's
Yeah.
quite bad. No, no, no. She then went on to say something like, what about the intersex or some nonsense? Oh, well, it's still a minority though, isn't it? I just, I can't stand it. I can't stand people who are presented with all the information. It's obvious, it's well researched, and they still fight against it.
Well, and at the end of the day, it does not matter like how hopeless these guys are. They keep on going back to that. Oh, it's okay as long as you're hopeless at sport. You can
Yeah.
play women's sport.
Yeah. If you
Like,
give them permanent bloody
you
brain
know,
injuries or anything, doesn't matter.
yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's okay as long as you're hopeless, you can play women's sport, right? Like, and that's the ABC has run that argument for years and years and years
It
that,
has.
you should. And that's Roxy Tickle's whole
Yeah.
personality is I'm hopeless at women's sport. Kath Deves should just calm down.
And Carolyn
Um,
Marcus came with this as well. She said, you know, the disadvantage is very small. The performance between when they start taking estrogen to the end, it's tiny. The man's punch is still like 150 times
yeah,
percent stronger than a woman's. And Laura Jays was unaffected by this. Why they obviously she's the host on daytime, so they're promoting the program for tonight. So obviously she was the one to talk to. But she was smug and annoying. They talk about how right wing Sky is, but Sky's got a lot of um, people who just aren't. Well, they go for the pretty women. I think is my thing, and they get women on there who can string a
there's
sentence together and look nice on the thing, but and it doesn't reflect that women are not as intelligent as men. It's that they choose. They don't go for men who are. I mean, some of them have got a decent face, but most of them, Andrew Connell, a bunch of those political reporters, none of them are oil paintings, you know.
are you saying that the journalists on Sky News don't necessarily represent feminists across Australia?
I know that's a shock take. That's a shocking take. Yeah, you wouldn't think that I would come out with such a radical take, but here I am
Crazy.
with my crazy narratives.
Yeah. As long as you don't start suggesting that they're being oppressed by some sort of a pretty reverse privilege or something, I don't know.
Oh, God forbid.
We can put it into an oppression narrative.
God forbid
Um,
I would suggest that the men of the executives of Sky News would discriminate against women who are smarter, but maybe not as,
maybe a bit
yeah.
more outspoken. I mean,
Mm,
I'm happy that we've got. I quite like Rita Panahi and
I do too. Yeah. Credlin, Peter Credlin.
Peter Credlin. The
Yeah.
names in my mind.
Who
Yeah,
we hate. I mean, you may not have
yeah,
hated her, but I used to hate her because that was all the left hated her. Because she was a big evil person. Um,
yeah.
but she's actually a very smart person. She's definitely liberal. She's definitely conservative. She definitely says things I don't agree with sometimes. But on this issue, she's intelligent, she's balanced. Yeah, she's a smart cookie. She's political now, says, second to none. And she's never had
Yeah.
any children. I don't want to say that's a thing, but it obviously is a thing. It probably feeds into what you've been writing about this week. When you are a woman and you've had children, it does take a big chunk out of your career,
Mm.
often. And when you've been able to dedicate your whole life to your career, especially when you're an interesting person like she is and interested in things and really
And
smart and
yeah,
committed.
very involved in politics as well, which
Yeah,
is a bit of a man's game. Yeah.
yeah, it does sort of make you stand out as an exceptional person. Yeah, which I
Yeah.
think she is. Your blog this week, Lady Kit Kowalski,
Yeah,
is on the
so
gender pay gap.
yeah, I did a little post on the gender pay gap and the ABC's coverage thereof. Um, and just very simple analysis, just showing how gender identity corrupts sex like data.
Mm.
Um, and the gender pay gap, it's not one of my favorite measures, like statistical measures. I think it's like
Oh,
quite fraught. And I'm not entirely sure if it tells us anything worth knowing. But I'm a big believer in data and kind of having these measures and then having a talk about what they mean and
yeah.
whether or not it's helpful and, whether or not it reveals anything.
Aggregate
You
data
know,
is important, I think. And when you look at
yeah,
male pattern violence, they don't seem to be in love with aggregate data anymore on the ABC when it comes to prisons, when it comes to obvious male pattern violence and
no.
how gender identity affects patterns of male pattern violence. They don't seem to have much curiosity about that.
No, it's very unfortunate. They they like this sort of, like the gender pay gap. It's like this really big sensationalist number that sort of says, well, the ABS puts women 12% behind men, and the WGR puts women 22% behind men in terms of the gender pay gap. But then it doesn't really say anything. It just kind of like gives you this sense of unfairness. It doesn't say anything about seniority. It doesn't say anything about child rearing. It doesn't say anything about structure of families. It
Mm.
doesn't, it just
Whether
kind of,
whether women want to, which is
whether, yeah, like
participate equally in the workforce, which is what
exactly.
Germaine Greer has
Yeah.
often talked about. That she's not an equity feminist because she doesn't think that it's actually good for women to be just like men. Um, I think there's an assumption, particularly with the anti-feminists, where women want to be like men. But having equal opportunities, like for instance, to be a political reporter or, a, a sort of face on Sky News, um, to actually wanting the life that men live, where, they ruthlessly climb the corporate ladder or whatever. Um, Maybe women don't want that life, which is what some studies might reveal, is that women sometimes choose to be in jobs where they might get more enjoyment rather than more money.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's like the
Part-time
gender pay
jobs.
gap. That might be true. And you know what? It might not be. But the
Hmm.
gender pay gap doesn't tell you anything
No.
about that. Like, it doesn't talk about superannuation that's being banked. It doesn't talk
Hmm.
about like, yeah. So I don't know.
Yeah,
It's one of those measures I kind of love to hate.
I'm not a fan of that kind of dialogue either way. Either the right
And
wing dialogue. I
no,
know Jordan Peterson made a big thing about it a couple of years ago when he had that interview in the UK, with what's her name? What you really mean is, um, eh, where she kept reframing his words. His argument was sound, you know, and some of that probably could have been pushed back on and entered into a more interesting conversation about the rights of women, but that's not what they do. That's
mm,
not, we could talk about what women actually want instead of saying, let's give them unlimited childcare so they can do exactly the same thing that men do. Maybe they don't want to do exactly the same thing as men do. Maybe are willing to sacrifice pay to stay at home with the children. Maybe women are different to men.
and I
That's a
think this
radical
is
idea.
like this is an argument that I don't know if we're ready to really have in society. Like, what is it? Given all the possibilities, what is it that we actually want to go for?
Hmm. Yeah.
Like what are women's politics?
Yeah, can we
Um,
talk about that? Can we talk about what it means to be a mother? I just had a birthday of my oldest daughter and was talking about when she was born. Um, and it was a risky birth. There were some complications. And I said it was the first time in my life where I was frightened. I was terrified, but I wasn't terrified as much for my own life. It was the first time in my life that there was another human being that wasn't even outside my body, where I would have in a second given up my own life for that person to live. And you don't know that until that second when you're absolutely terrified, but it's not your own life. Like if someone comes and threatens you with a knife and you're alone in your house, you're terrified of your own life. You're still a person who wants to defend their own life and who's terrified. But when that other element comes in and your child is threatened, It's a completely different thing, and
Yeah.
no one will know that. And being a mother means something, and women are
It,
prepared to
yeah.
sacrifice for it.
It absolutely does. And I think that there needs to be a conversation around like making space for women to be mothers, right? Because yes, some women don't want to have children, some women don't have the opportunity. Okay,
Mm.
there's no shame, no judgment, nothing.
No,
Um, but a lot of women want to be mothers.
yeah,
And there needs to be a conversation in society about accommodating that in a woman's life, accommodating career,
yeah,
accommodating motherhood, and
yeah,
literally like creating the next generation of people, which is the most valuable thing that
yes,
you can do for a society,
mm,
honoring, valuing that, not denigrating it.
yeah,
Yeah,
and providing, making better humans,
yeah.
and to do with fatherhood as well. But obviously in the gender pay gap, we don't talk about that as much.
No.
Um,
So
we think if the child is equally bereft of both parents, that somehow the
it's like raised
revolution,
by the state or raised by
uh,
strangers or,
the
you know,
revolution will be there. And that's another thing I was talking about, control and protection and control. Once those children are in daycare, and you hear Tanya Plibersek talk about this lovely utopia that she wants to create, where all the children will be pretty much raised by the state. What do you think the state's going to want in exchange for that? They'll be pumping this LGBT shit into their veins at the daycare center. That they pay for this. If you track that story back, which we did live on the podcast, to a person who is a PhD candidate at a university, a researcher being publicly funded. All the arts programs now are publicly funded with a purpose.
mm,
Um, then what do you think is going to happen? This is a very bad, which is a conversation I've been having with about Trump and by a few people. Yeah, he's a hammer. He's a disruptor. Um, I'm not
and
convinced that's a bad thing. I
and
mean,
you know,
it's not
yeah.
just a gender thing. People say, "Oh, yeah, sure, he knows what a woman is," but what about all the other authoritarian things? Well, maybe he's just going to cause a massive amount of trouble. Maybe he's going to take all the money out of this, and all of a sudden we're going to find that something good will happen out of it. Got to
You
be
know,
an
talk about
optimist.
like coercion. You know, we're in a situation where so many families, like the mother and the father both work, the kids go to grandma or they go to the
Mm,
state, right? You know, women's like grandma is has raised her kids. Now she's raising the second lot of kids,
yeah.
or they're in the daycare. And if you object to the diversity, the inclusion, like the queer messaging that might
Mm,
be going through your daycare, well, not only are you paying for that daycare, and like I
mm,
can tell you, it's not cheap,
no.
right? Or you're paying for the school to give your child that messaging. Um, if you want, say, you want to homeschool, you lose a wage, right? Like you're coerced into it, like your entire lifestyle is locked into paying the mortgage, paying
Yeah.
the school, paying the daycare.
Mm,
And it's very hard to object.
yeah. And it's a capitalist system thing, right?
Yeah,
So the kind of the things of right and left are blurred.
yeah.
We say fascism is right wing. Hmm. Is it
Well,
really
can
anymore?
we and we need to get beyond left and right. I know
I
I've been
think so.
saying left quite a lot recently, but there
Hmm.
just needs to be a breakaway from this conversation of left and right. There just has to be.
Yeah, I use them as ways to be understood, and the
Yeah.
concept says ways to be understood, but yeah, you have to stop thinking in those terms, because these people are appropriating the political capital of the left. I know they've said that a few times in terms of the political capital of women and gays, but they are appropriating the political capital of the left, the political virtue of the left. Oh, we're the ones who, got the wages. We're the ones that,
Save the environment,
yeah, got the
stop
women's
the
rights.
Franklin. Yeah.
Yeah, did all the things. And now we'll use this moral authority to tell you all the things that are the good things. And we'll teach the children all the things that are good things, and we're going to make them better citizens than those
It's the
right-wing
middle
nut
class
jobs.
cuckoo in the nest.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. And
Yeah.
they're annoyingly superior. And you see them out in the wild. Sometimes I see these I shouldn't say middle-aged white women because I'm looking at a reflection of myself. Uh, but
Well,
they can
we
be, and
can,
middle-aged white men, or any coloured man, but generally the ones I see have contact with. Um, and they're very smug, and they put the little green sign out the front of their house, or Friends of the ABC, or We're All in the Environment, in the front of their, $3 million house as they come home from their, 200 grand a year job. And they're all really for the environment and for the oppressed.
ah,
I think that's
well,
most of the things we
I think
wanted to
that's
talk
it.
about this
I-
week.
we've probably done it at this point. That's
Hmm.
quite, I thought we'd have nothing to talk about, but we managed to.
Yeah, we
All
managed to do
right.
it. I can feel the
Yeah.
breeze coming from under the door.
So, yeah,
The
you better go
winds,
batten down the hatches before Cyclone
oh,
Alfred
they're battened down. We're just waiting
is,
for the bloody thing. I mean,
oh, you poor
when we
thing.
flooded in 2011, it was like 24 hours before they said, "Look, guys, you're going to flood." To when I lived at South Bank at
Yeah.
the time, and in an apartment that had a river view. So I sat there and watched until the power went out, and I had to go and stay with some friends. And our basement was flooded, and our car
Wow.
park was flooded. But I watched everything. The Brisbane River, you can't hear it. Even when you live close to it, you can't hear it. But it was roaring. And I watched restaurants go down and
Mm.
boats go down and all this debris and smash into the thing. It was quite exciting, but it was very and then there was a cleanup. Yeah, which
Yeah.
was a tragedy. A friend of ours was flooded, so we spent days working through the mud and stuff. But this is like, oh yeah, we're gonna get the cyclone on Thursday, so we're all ready. We're all off work. Then they say, maybe it's going to be Friday
Friday.
morning,
Yeah.
and maybe it's going to be Friday afternoon. All right.
Well, it looks pretty hairy on the satellite image.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah. So hopefully
I'll
I'll
be
get this
thinking of you
uploaded
and
before then because the power's almost definitely going to go out, and the internet. Yeah. So hopefully I'll get uploaded before the everything goes out, and we have to sit in the dark and look at each other, and you know,
and
I do my crochet.
what is it? The quote from Futurama, huddled together like lice in a burning wig.
Yeah. Well, that
So yeah,
hopefully
hopefully
be
you
more
you're
enjoyable though.
okay. Yeah,
Mm.
hopefully you. Oh, I will be thinking of you and everybody else who's up in Brisbane at the moment, and
Yeah. Well, it made me think
hope it
about
all
women
passes over.
because I
Yeah.
thought about, of course, when you have a child who has a birthday, you think about when you gave birth to them. Imagine being heavily pregnant.
Oh, God, no.
Imagine
Yeah.
thinking, what if I go into labor? Because it's like 12 hours of the category two. Then it goes to the category, then it might
Yeah.
travel down. But if you're in the center, you're in the center for like most of the day.
Yeah.
And then you're still not going to just, oh, there it goes and get out. And then it's still category one and a tropical low.
And all
It's
the other stuff that goes along with all that, like
the
loss of
debris
power and loss of
and the
staff and
and how you're
yeah.
going to get to the out of the house, and all the the roads are closed and flooded, and yeah. So my solidarity and thoughts with the women who are laboring at the moment, and who are heavily pregnant, or who are sick and critically ill. I can't imagine. So we've got it pretty good. We're all fine. We're just gonna brace. I don't know how I'm gonna take my dog to the toilet. That's the only thing I can't figure out.
I've got no help. I've got no suggestions.
My husband's able to take him on the leash and goes. It's
Well,
like Toto. We're going to end up in
yeah,
Kansas.
I was gonna say just don't end up in Oz or stay in Oz. Don't go to Kansas.
That's right. All
All
right,
right,
off.
let's leave it there. So thank
Okay.
you for joining us again on the Dollhouse. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. We are on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and our notes are on Substack. I'm Kit Kowalski. I'm here with Edie Wyatt, and we will be back next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.